Finally, the overturning of Roe v. Wade means states will decide whether they will preserve or deny access to an abortion. In New York, protections for legal abortion predate the original Roe v. Wade decision. In recent days, the Hochul administration has attempted to enshrine access to abortion in the state constitution, further strengthening those protections. On Thursday of this week, Governor Hochul provided a path for funds that would bolster security at reproductive health care centers across the state. Governor Hochul has stated that she intends for New York's comprehensive reproductive health services to be available to women and families whether they reside in New York State or not. And New York is likely to see an increase in out-of-state residents seeking abortion services in New York. That has some Republican legislators concerned about who would carry the cost. Dave Lombardo from the Capitol Press Room spoke to Republican Senator Phil Boyle from the 4th District. Boyle has proposed a bill that would prohibit the use of state funds for non-New York residents seeking an abortion within the state's borders.
Well, welcome to the show, Senator. I really appreciate you making the time.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you for having me here.
So this spring, Governor Kathy Hochul, in anticipation of increased demand for New York abortion providers, directed $35 million to beef up the capacity of providers in New York, as well as improve their security in anticipation of Roe v. Wade being overturned. You've introduced legislation that would restrict state spending for non-New York resident abortions. Can you talk about how your bill would work if implemented?
Sure. So, David, one thing I think people need to realize, obviously, despite the decision on Roe versus Wade, New York State is going to continue to be a pro-choice state. That is not changing. It's protected in state law now. And also, another thing we can be pretty sure about is the fact that there's going to be a lot of women coming from those states that are either banning or restricting abortions. I think my understanding was there's about 26 states that are going to either completely ban or restrict abortions. So it's very likely that women will be coming from those states to New York to obtain abortions, which is their right. My bill is directed towards the idea of New York State taxpayers paying for those abortions. I could see, particularly with the left that's controlling much of the agenda in Albany, is the use of New York State taxpayer money to fly women from Texas or Louisiana up to New York, overnight hotel stays, obtaining the abortion procedure, and then flying them back to their state. This could be done theoretically by the tens of thousands and will cost New York State taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars or even billions of dollars over the course of years. And that's something is completely insane and unacceptable.
So it sounds like your concern then is about cost and not necessarily, I guess, respecting what other states have decided to do with regards to abortion measures?
Well, I mean, I personally am opposed to the idea of them using New York prosecutors or trying to prosecute women that come from their state. That's their own law. I'm mostly concerned about the taxpayers of New York paying for that. Obviously, New York taxpayers have paid for abortions for many years through Medicaid. So Medicaid funding from taxpayers in New York fund abortions for indigent New York women. But this is a whole new ballgame. This is talking about New York State taxpayers paying for abortions for women who don't even live here.
At this point, though, is there any indication that state policymakers like the governor have plans to invest in maybe travel or accommodations for non-New York women seeking abortions? I know during the Democratic primary debate, Governor Hochul was asked this specific question, and she said no to the idea of providing transportation. So is there anything that you're seeing that's actually happening that would prompt this bill to take effect, or is this more about future concerns?
Well, I actually was working on this bill prior to the decision. We started working on it when the leak happened a few months back of the decision. But I think it's a slippery slope, David, because Governor Hochul said, okay, we want to put $35 million aside of taxpayer money to expand access to abortion in New York State. For example, she wants to put, I think, $10 million of those funds towards security and reproductive health centers. Fine, that's completely understandable, okay? The other $25 million, we haven't got the details on that. She wants to use it to expand abortion access, whatever that means, hiring more people in abortion clinics. Or I could see either her or some maybe the liberals that control the state legislature for the new budget cycle, putting money aside to give to not-for-profits. So it's not directly going to Sally Jones in Louisiana to come to New York, but it's going to go to a not-for-profit, taxpayer money going to a New York State taxpayer funded not-for-profit, and then they will give the money to women. So either way, I don't want New York State taxpayers to have to pay for abortions for women who do not reside in New York State.
Well, how would this bill affect, if at all, women who could afford to come to New York and afford to pay for an abortion on their own?
Well, then that is their right. And so we have different potential situations. For example, a woman coming from Louisiana can either, maybe she works for a company that's willing to pay for it. I heard that Disney, Google, Apple, some other companies have agreed to pay for their employees to come to New York or other states to obtain abortions. That's their right. Or maybe Mike Bloomberg or 10 other billionaires want to create a private fund with their own money to pay for these women. That's their right too. It's their money. I'm just talking about protecting New York State taxpayers from having to pay from women to come into the state to receive their abortions.
Any qualms, though, about essentially limiting access to abortion then to people who could afford to pay for it on their own by essentially saying, if you can't afford to make it to New York, you're out of luck?
Well, out of luck is a relative term. I mean, these women certainly have rights to obtain abortions, and if someone can afford it, I assume they're going to do it themselves, or have a family member or a friend or company that would do it, or a privately funded fund. I'm just talking about saying, all right, New York State taxpayer, we have the highest taxes in the entire country, and people are always complaining about our taxes, and many people are leaving the state because of it. Oh, by the way, we have a new thing we want to fund from Albany, and that's abortions for women who don't even live in this state, which are going to come up to hundreds of millions of dollars of your taxpayer money. And this could be the straw that broke the camel's back in terms of people leaving the state. I mean, our taxes are high enough. We don't need to find new things to pay for abortions for women who don't reside in New York State.
If someone was, say, visiting New York State and let's say there was some sort of medical emergency that required an abortion and they couldn't foot the bill, would they just have to get sent to another state? I mean, how would you envision their care being handled if your bill became law?
Well, I think that there's different situations like that. If it's an emergency situation, obviously there can be exceptions in this. I'm just talking about a woman who's in another state that restricts or bans abortions, coming to New York State, either flying or driving, hotel stay, the abortion procedure, and then going back home to wherever they live. There's different ways of funding that. I just do not want the New York State taxpayers to be on the hook for that. And I can tell you, David, I've spoken to people on all sides of this debate. The obviously pro-life people are opposed to it. The moderates or who support abortion rights but that's not a huge issue for them. And very pro-choice people. I've spoken to many of them since I was working on this bill. Some people who are very upset about the Roe versus Wade decision, very pro-choice. And I always ask them, so what about us paying your taxpayer money going to fund a woman coming from another state? They're all like, nope, that's too far. I can tell you that having spoke to over 100 people, 2 of them have said they would support that. So even the real pro-choice people, if you will, oppose the idea of New York State taxpayers paying for women abortions for non-residents of New York.
Putting aside the fiscal implications that you've outlined, any reservations about potentially being, on the wrong side of history?
I think there's no question that this is the right side of history. And I'm not talking about the abortion debate. Obviously, people feel strongly on all sides. I'm just talking about requiring New York State taxpayers to fund abortions for women who don't live there. If they want to, right now the Democrats control the White House and both branches of the United States Congress. If they want to create a federal fund, not including the state legislature's money, they can do it. Go ahead. That's their prerogative. But I'm just talking about a state legislators watching out for New York State taxpayers. And that's what this bill is about. And I think it's the right side of history.
Well, we've been speaking with State Senator Phil Boyle. He is a Long Island Republican. Senator, thank you so much for making the time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, David.